Am I audible? Okay. So, hello, good evening to all of you, and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we consider the international edition of today's The Hindu newspaper, extract the articles relevant for your examination, be it for the prelims or the mains, and also take a look at the practice questions about how to go ahead with the answer writing in each of these questions. So, today, in total, we are going to have a discussion of 8 different topics, four of them in detail for your mains examination, and four of them in detail for your prelims preparation, where they will be important. So, the Donroe Doctrine, a broken international order. Now, that is an article which has appeared in the editorial section. Now, this is about America's foreign policy, and also this particular editorial piece takes a view of the challenges that India as a country faces going ahead into 2026. So, this is relevant for your GS paper too. Then, the EV boom, the electric vehicle boom, is accelerating copper crunch. Now, this is about the kind of scarcity that you have in terms of copper supply. But with the help of this, we shall take a look at a larger view of the copper industry. We shall understand what do we mean by the term transition minerals, and copper is a part of that transition mineral. The aspect of the refining concentration in the region of China, where are the copper rich regions in India, and what are the issues that copper production in India is generally plagued with. Now, this is obviously beyond the scope of the article, but then that is required for your examination. So, we will be exploring the areas beyond the scope of this article. This is relevant for your GS paper 1 as well as for your GS paper 3. Very important, from which a question can definitely be expected this year. Bridging the Gulf. Now, this is about Mohammed bin Zayed's visit to India and UAE and India's growing ties, and how India needs to pull off a great balancing act in order to ensure that its interests when it comes to Middle East or West Asia, that is something which is protected. So, this is again a smaller article relevant for your GS paper too. Then, the importance of Pax Silica for India. What is this Pax Silica? The alliance which is initiated by US for the silicon industry, for semiconductor manufacturing, and India is not a part of it, by the way. So that raises some alarm bells, but at the same time it provides us with a way forward as well about what we need to do going ahead into the future, and why India needs to be a part of this global program. So this can be relevant both for your GS paper 2 as well as for your GS paper. Then, some of the articles we are going to concentrate only for the prelims purposes. Now, in science section of today's newspaper, you have a detailed article about Darwin's bark spider, how the females they are able to weave much stronger web, and how the strength of the web is much stronger in the case of the female varieties. But rather than going into those details, which are not very important for your exams, we shall understand the IUCN conservation status, where they are endemic to, and in which region of the ecosystem can you find these Darwin's bark spiders. That becomes important for your prelims. Peatlands, where are peatlands across the world situated, and what do we mean by peatlands? In December, core sector grew at 4-month high. Now, which are the industries which led the growth, and what generally comprises the core sector of the economy? Now, Chagos Islands have again been put into news by none other than Mr. Trump himself, who basically termed UK's move to hand over Chagos Island as a kind of a stupid move. So that is why we will take a look at the locational aspect of the Chagos Islands. Now, before we move ahead into the first topic of the day and start our discussion with that, an important announcement for all of you. Now, based upon our experiences that we had in teaching GS to the various candidates, we felt that many of the candidates, while receiving online education and online platforms, they face certain issues. For example, they are hesitant to ask questions in the class. For example, there might be too many students out there in the class and they might feel marginalized over a bit. The mains answer writing is not done to the same level. The previous year questions are not discussed to the same extent. That is why, as a team, we have come up with the Unacademy Platinum. Now, in this Unacademy Platinum, Your cameras will be on so that you are concentrated and we are able to know that where you are lacking in terms of discipline. Because, mind you, discipline is only the only feature which distinguishes an aspirant from a ranker. Periodic evaluation and the test papers, then along with that, weekly discussion of the mains answer writing along with the model answers wherever required. So all this is done in Platinum. Now, if you want to experience this Platinum session, what it looks like, the free sessions, they are starting from 28th of January. On 28th of January, we will be launching Environment and Ecology. Do attend the free session and just take a look at what the Platinum experience is about. The link is provided in the description and it is also pinned in the comment section. So just attend the Platinum free session and just take a look at what is the experience that we are talking about. Now, having said that, we come to the first topic of the day, the Donroe Doctrine, a broken international order. Now, this article, an editorial piece, largely talks about all the foreign policy challenges that India faces in 2026. Now, foreign policy, it will be quite safe to say, has been upended on its heels in the year 2025 ever since the Trump administration came into charge. Every other day, there are newer threats, there are newer geopolitical challenges which emerge. And countries accordingly are kept on their toes and they have to continuously maneuver in this complex dynamics. Now, that is where the Donroe Doctrine is also making a lot of news headlines. It is nothing, you would be aware about it. It is nothing but a kind of a language term, which is or a wordplay of the Monroe Doctrine. Now, let us summarize this entire article in brief point-wise manner so that you are able to understand the gist out of it. So, first of all, 2026 is going to be an year of uncertainty. And what was not the case in the past 50 years almost, this uncertainty is primarily driven by the actions of United States, the sole global, in a way, the superpower which exists in the world since the breakup of the Soviet Union and since the end of the Cold War. Now, US has created a lot of uncertainty. When we talk about India, in terms of India, you can think about the various uncertainties in place directly arising out of US. First of all, US, how it deals with China. Now, that in itself has changed the playbook over the past few decades now. Earlier, US used to view China as a kind of a strategic competitor, if not a strategic enemy. And thereby, US would always take a look at the region of Asia Pacific as a region of contention with China. Now, when the national security doctrine was released by Donald Trump recently, he was very much okay with the fact that the region of Asia, the region of Taiwan, could be left with the Chinese hands. In fact, when a reporter asked a question to Mr. Trump himself that what do you think about Taiwan, his answer was as straight and as direct as it could be, that it is upon the hands of Xi Jinping. So that is something that Chinese would always want to hear. Now, US is trying to have and foster a deal and a closer relationship with China, which puts us in a kind of a jeopardy whereby China is our neighbor and is an aggressive neighbor for that matter. While we are also trying to improve trade relations, people to people connect with China, but still the challenges do remain on the ground. So that is where the US approach to China in itself poses some threats and some challenges to India. Then we had certain multilaterals. For example, if you consider the Quad. Now, Quad was a multilateral grouping which basically put shivers down China's spine as well. Now, Quad basically included four member countries, that is, US, India, Australia, and Japan. And that was about ensuring the freedom of navigation in the sea lanes and ensuring that any country in the region should not be a hegemon. Now, since Trump came to power, now the summit meeting for Quad has been postponed. It was supposed to be held in 2025. Now it was pushed, it was postponed. Now, if you believe the newest US ambassador to India, Sergio Gore had said that Trump is expected to visit India in the next 1 or 2 years. Mind you, the next Quad meet, summit meet, is going to be hosted by India. So US India are not looking eye to eye as of now. So as much as this gets delayed due to the ego tantrums of Donald Trump, that is where the grouping and its future in itself is at stake. Then comes the case of trade. Everything is dependent on economic aspect, and trade and the tariff tantrums which are indicated by US, that has basically put doubts in the overall global order which was being followed since the setting up of the WTO. Now, United States is becoming increasingly transactional, due to which there are various different challenges that India confronts, from exploring newer markets to also looking at avenues in order to how to bypass these tariffs which have been in India. Now, this is just the US sphere of uncertainty that we are looking at. Other than that, look at the region of Europe. Now, never has Europe been in so much of turmoil since the breakup of Soviet Union in the end of Cold War era. Now Trump is challenging the sovereignty over Greenland. Trump is also threatening the European nations with additional tariffs because they have supported Greenland and they have supported Denmark over the issue of Greenland. So that is why Europe in itself, whether it is an ally of US or whether it is a kind of a liability for US, that in itself changes the policy parameters. For example, you would observe that all the major European leaders, from if you take a look at Emmanuel Macron to the case of the German Chancellor, all of them have slated multiple visits to China in order to resolve their issues, their differences, and in order to explore newer markets. So they are already looking for and discovering, and rather, they are exploring newer markets, newer alternatives, and trying to replace the US hegemony. Now, in this particular situation, Europe in itself becomes a kind of a challenge for Indian export market as well. Because if you think about it, once the Chinese get an inroad into the European market, that will follow the same kind of playbook which the Chinese exports follow: cheap exports, which means the local industries they get decapitated, and eventually the other exporting nations they also tend to suffer. So that is where India's interests can also be hampered. Then, when you come to the region of West Asia, now in West Asia, every other day, there is a threat about bombing either in Iran or in some other nation which might have riled up Trump. So that is where West Asia being in flux means our very important energy security, which is provided by the oil imports. Now, that is something which can be at risk. And that can always drive up the oil prices, right? Now, we also have to keep in mind that West Asia is important for us because of the very large diaspora that we have. So, that diaspora is also responsible for a huge amount of remittances which are provided to India year after year. India is the largest recipient of remittances anywhere across the globe. And then, even in our vicinity of South Asia. Now, that is where the neighboring country of Pakistan has been successful in courting Trump. And that is where the field marshal, which Trump calls as his favorite field marshal, has gained multiple different concessions from the Americans. Arming of the Pakistanis is something which has never had a good result when it comes to India. So these are the uncertainties that plague us overall. And India, as you can see, will be impacted by each one of them. Each one of these activities can have a direct and a long term consequence for India as well. So, starting first of all with the Donroe Doctrine. Now, it started with the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine, articulated in 1823 by the US President James Monroe. Now, just to give you a brief background about it, now the early 1800s was the time when you had the decline of the Spanish and the Portuguese colonial rule in South America and in the entire region of Latin America. So, at that point of time, the United States basically had a fear that the other European nations, looking at the decline of the Spanish and the Portuguese, might grab that opportunity and might start colonizing these regions in Latin America and even South America. That is where you had the Monroe Doctrine, which talked about the fact that, look, the Western Hemisphere is our sphere of influence. And that is where we should have no colonization, non interference policies have to be followed. So, no colonization and non interference in the Western Hemisphere. And US has followed that for a long period of time, that we will not interfere in your region, you don't interfere in the entire Western Hemisphere. For that matter, if you take a look at even the outcomes of the Second World War. Now, the Second World War, there also US was pulled into action after the Japanese attack into the Pearl Harbor. Before that, US was happy to be isolated. Now, this Monroe Doctrine has, over a period of couple of centuries now, gone through multiple different changes. For example, Eisenhower and the various other presidents, when they wanted to basically append the kind of rules that and the rulers that you had in Latin America, they would always cite this Monroe Doctrine, that no, this was a kind of a despotic rule, this was an autocratic rule, this was a dictatorship, and as per the Monroe Doctrine, we are basically removing them from power. And we are basically, so that kind of action has been followed by US previously in multiple Latin American nations. Well, so that has been the Monroe Doctrine. Now it has again been reinvigorated by Donald Trump. And that is why the name Donroe Doctrine. Now, Donald Trump basically, when he carried out his action against Venezuela, where he simply abducted the president, and that is as simple as you can frame it. So the president was abducted. Whether the president was legally appointed or whether he was autocratic or not, that is a discussion for a different day. But a president, a sitting president, was abducted and was removed from power. Now, similar threats have been issued for Cuba, for Mexico, for Colombia, any nation virtually in the region of Latin America who does not pay obeisance to Donald Trump stands at the risk of being on the wrong end of the Donroe Doctrine. Now, Donroe Doctrine again basically talks about the case of Western Hemisphere dominance across the Western Hemisphere. And this is something which was highlighted in United States' own national security policy, which was actually released a couple of months earlier. Now, at that point of time, US basically made it clear that, look, these are our areas of influence, which has a very dangerous corollary. What does that mean? Or very dangerous implication. Now, US was considered to be the sole global hegemon, or or a sole global superpower which exists. So you would find US interventions from the regions like Vietnam, historically to Korea, to the region of West Asia, South Asia, everywhere you could basically find some or the other kind of US intervention. And largely, US was involved in upholding a kind of a rules-based international order. Now, when US is seeking to restrict itself into the Western Hemisphere, which means there are other spheres of influence, which basically US is happy to leave it to the others. For example, spheres of influence in the region of Western Pacific by China, the sphere of influence in the region of Eastern Hemisphere. Now, mind you, Eastern Hemisphere is where the entire Europe, in fact, almost the entirety of Europe lies in the region of the Eastern Hemisphere. So that is where it is happy to leave it to countries like Russia and the overall defense might of the region of Europe. That is where you are seeing that the European nations are arming themselves to the teeth, and they are spending heavily in their defense infrastructure. So this Donroe Doctrine has got its own set of challenges. And as you had the CNN columnist Fareed Zakaria, who ably put it out, that look, Donald Trump has carried out actions in Venezuela. Donald Trump has carried out actions in Greenland. Donald Trump has also carried out actions in Iran. Does not mean it is a part of the same doctrine. All these are impulsive actions taken by US. So that is why right now, when it comes to countries like India, we have a substantial amount of danger when it comes to our energy supply. We are an energy starved nation. Almost more than two-thirds of our energy imports are basically coming from the region of Middle East, Latin America in certain cases, and so on. So wherever Trump invades, immediately any country doing business with that particular region is sanctioned upon. So that is where the implications are running high. Then Europe. Europe is under a large magnifying lens right now. From starting with the case of the defense expenditure, defense budget that they have, to the case of trade, trade issues, to the issues of climate change, to the issues of migration, all the major issues which basically confronts the entirety of the world population. Now, Europe has been put to test by the Trump administration. As Donald Trump is about to reach to Davos and is about to address the global media as well and hold a CEO summit and a CEO forum. Now, at that point of time, you have European nations participating in Davos, World Economic Forum in Davos, and all of them are expressing the reservation against the utilization and the use of tariffs in a punitive manner. So all these European nations, which had largely for the past decade and a half followed a policy of economic integration with United States, now all of them are busy recalibrating their policies and even for that matter, trying to come to terms of what is happening to them. That is where you will find that German Chancellor's visit to India will be followed by the Chancellor's visit to China now. And then again, Canada is actually trying to smoothen out the issues with the Chinese supply lines. And this is where China is emerging out to be a much responsible global power as compared to US. So Europe is looking at diversifying its markets. That is where the free trade agreement that India is seeking to do with Europe also comes at a good time, provided that we are able to finalize that. And at the same time, you have to understand that the diversification or the relook at China is something that the Chinese have been waiting for decades now. Then, when we take a look at the periphery of Asia itself, now, US was very close to bombing Iran. Now, there were multiple different calls which went from the Gulf nations, from various different competing and enemy states as well, which urged the US not to carry out these bombings. So, what that tells you is that the entire region of Middle East and West Asia is also on the tenterhooks because earlier they had some amount of assurance that if, let's suppose, there is a kind of a risk that we face, US can come to our rescue. Now, that particular assurance is not there. And the nations, for example, Saudi Arabia, etc., they are also very clear that tomorrow, if let's suppose Netanyahu or Israel decides to attack Saudi Arabia, Donald Trump will also attack Saudi Arabia. If Israel tries to attack Qatar, next you will have the US also attacking Qatar, despite having one of the largest military bases in the region. Now, as a consequence, all of them have started forming their own alliances. You would have seen the formation of an alliance between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, a defense agreement, and Turkey also joining that. So it is like a kind of a Middle Eastern NATO which has been created there. So that is why the entire periphery of Asia, when you consider the region of West Asia is in a situation of flux or a situation of transition. And we already talked about why it is important for India for energy security and for the large diaspora which is finding employment and ways of earning in that region. All of that can be disturbed. Then, even when we talk about the region of South Asia also. Now, there, US is following a typical hands free and a hands off policy for a long period of time. Now, Pakistan is being empowered beyond all reckoning, something which takes us back to the late 80s, the 70s, or even the 60s. Now, that is where you will find that there has been a kind of an oppressive or a kind of an onslaught by the Pakistanis in the region of Afghanistan. The terrorism issue is again rearing up its head in the region of South Asia, which lie dormant for a long period of time. But given the free reign and the free hand which is given the field marshal now, you can expect much more tumultuous and a turbulent time in the region of South Asia for the years to come. And for a country like India, it basically means we have to stiffen our security apparatus, we have to be on our toes, and we have to ensure that we are not on the lookout for any help from anywhere, and we are, in true words, a kind of Atmanirbhar Bharat. So that is the way forward that we can follow. Now, it is a challenging road ahead. So, what should be the policy followed by India? So India has to follow a kind of a collaborative, cooperative policy. What does that mean? That the powers which are stronger than us, for example, we are clearly living in a G2 world where you have again the emergence of two superpowers, the Chinese and the Americans. So we have to collaborate with them, we have to cooperate with them. And when it comes to middle powers, in the case of the middle powers, you have to compete with them, but in a cooperative manner again. For example, when you consider European nations, when you consider India, when you consider Japan, when you consider Australia, Canada, these are the nations with which we have to basically have a cooperative framework and dialogue. So, and when it comes to the small island nations, that is where African nations, that is where Indian diplomacy can have an outreach, starting with our own neighborhood in the smaller nations. Also, we can have an outreach, we can have to cool down our neighborhood and then move ahead into the case of the global cooperation. Okay, so that is the case of the entirety of the article. Let's take a look at the practice question. What are the challenges and opportunity for India's foreign policy in an ever changing world order? Now, here in the intro, it is a 10 marker. So, a straightforward answer you have to write in the intro. You directly have to talk about that and give an idea about how the global world order has been changing, has become much more transactional. The issues which favor any particular superpower, those are the issues which are carried forward. And those issues which should be followed as a matter of principle are oftentimes kept in the back seat. That should be your intro, a kind of an abstract intro. Then the first sentence of your body, that is where you can highlight about this issue by talking about that ever since the Trump administration has taken power, Putin's Russia has grown aggressive, and Xi's China has been indicating hegemonic designs. The global security, well being, and trade is at greater risk. So, what you are doing right now, you are describing the problem, right? And that is when, after that, very smooth transition into the challenges is what you can move into. The challenges for a country of 1.5 billion population like India are manifold. They can be listed under, and that is where you can have trade uncertainty, trade, then supply chain bottlenecks, okay, supply chain issues. Then after that, you can also have the case of the Indian workers, service sector. Okay. Then the case of strategic alignment, quad alignment. Okay. Then defense posturing, posturing. What is the difference between strategic alignment and defense posturing? Strategic alignment, who do you partner with? Defense posturing, what will you need to have in order to ward off any kind of untoward activity towards you? So, all these you highlight as some of the challenges. Obviously, you will write a couple of sentences for each of the point. Now, it is also asking you to highlight the opportunity. What is the opportunity that India faces? This is the time to collaborate with the middle powers. This is the time, for example, ever since the Trump policy of tariffs have come in, it can be argued that our economy has carried out multiple reforms from the labor codes and so on in the from GST rationalization, labor code reform, all of that within a manner of few months. So this is an opportunity to look inwards as well and get our house in order, to basically build up the defense infrastructure, to move into multiple minilaterals, right? Minilaterals and multilaterals need to be strengthened. Okay. Now, then after that, we come to the next article. The EV boom is accelerating a copper crunch. Now, see, this is an article which is going to be very important for this year's examination, prelims and mains, even for next year's examination, prelims and mains. Why? Because copper is a kind of a mineral where the world is facing a kind of a crunch. Now, which are the regions which are rich in copper? Is India rich in copper mineral? The answer is no. Regions which are typically rich in copper, they are basically Chile, Peru, DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, these are some of the countries which are very, very rich in terms of copper reserves. Some of the countries in the Katanga Plateau region in the central southern Africa as well. That is also where you will find substantial amount of copper deposits. Now, that copper which is being produced, it cannot be utilized immediately. It has to be filtered, refined. Now, what China has done over the years. Now, because China could not increase its own supply of copper, it increased substantially the refining capabilities and the smelting capabilities of copper. As a consequence of that, almost two-thirds of the global copper is now being channelized through China in some way or the other. I will show you the graphical representation. So that is why copper is a mineral which is in demand. Multiple countries have begun to hoard it. They have begun to stockpile the some amount of copper reserve. Now, why is copper suddenly so important? So that is something that we will take a look into. Now, this article just talks about, gives you the basic metrics about this is the copper demand, this is going to increase. That's it. But your requirement for examination is much higher than that. So a detailed PDF regarding copper issues with India is something that I will also provide to you in the Telegram channel. If you have not already got it, in my Telegram channel, I will give you the PDF, a summarization of copper important for your examination. Having said that, when we talk about this copper, now copper is what is also referred to as the transition mineral. What is a transition mineral? A transition mineral, and what are transition minerals? For example, if you consider minerals such as lithium, cobalt, right, copper, all these minerals. Now, these minerals are very important in order to transition from the fossil fuel sources of energy into a renewable and sustainable source of energy. That is why they are known as transition minerals. They help in transition, right? Transition from fossil fuels, fossil fuels to sustainable methods. Okay, that is why it is known as a transition mineral. Now, from here, for example, when you take a look at copper. Now, in the case of copper, you can utilize copper for manufacturing of the large battery packs for the electric vehicles, for the wiring, the circuitry. Electric energy is going to be much more important. From lithium, you can use to manufacture the lithium ion batteries as well in order to store the renewable energy. So that is why these help you transition. That is the transition mineral. Now, major use that you will find, which is accelerating, is in electric vehicle sector. Now, EVs require 4 to 5 times more amount of copper as compared to your traditional internal combustion engine that you have in the vehicle still now. Why? Because in EVs, you will find larger battery packs are available, right? Increased power electronics are required, extensive wiring is required, rapid expansion of charging infrastructure is also required. Are all critical minerals transition minerals? No. All critical minerals are not transition minerals. All rare earth elements are not transition minerals. Transition minerals are those which allow you or which help you to transition. For example, generally, when we think about semiconductors, we think semiconductors, many of the times we misplace them also as transition minerals. No, they are not. These are typically those of your minerals which help you transition from the fossil fuel use. For fossil fuel use, you could burn coal, produce energy, and that would help you run the engine. But in the case of electric vehicles, you need these copper wirings. For example, if you make the PCBs, etc., also, you need these wirings. So that is where cobalt is used, chromium is used, copper is used, lithium is used. So those basically come under the category of transition minerals. Okay. Now, the electric vehicles and their growth has surged in the past decade, and it has surged manifold. So overall, between 2015 and 2025, electric vehicle sales, they rose from about 0.55 million units to nearly 20 million units. You have giants which have been created like BYD, right? Which has outsold the number of cars as compared to even Tesla. So during the same period, EV related copper consumption surged from roughly 27,000 tons over 1.2 million tons. So you can imagine the amount of surge only in 1 decade, right? EV related copper demand rose from 39,000 tons again to 1.1, 1.2 million tons. In 2024, global supplies slightly exceeded demand by around zero point 0.3 tons, slight amount of exceedance. By 2026, demand is projected to reach 30 million tons, while supply lags around 28. So, as you can see, the supply demand gap is going to increase, and by the year 2030, it can reach multiple million tons, which alone will be the total output of multiple mines in the world taken together. So, in that particular case, what will be the outcome? Think about it and apply your logic. If copper is present in very little amount, its price will increase. Now, unless and until you find a replacement material for copper, you will buy it or import it at a high price. For a country like India, which is now going to transition into electric vehicles, we have not transitioned, we are now entering into the phase of transition. So, that transition for India will be much costlier. Now, who has the available technology and the available amount of market share in terms of electric vehicles? US and China. Now, those are the automobile sectors which will dominate the entirety of the world. So, that is where the automobile sector in our country can also get impacted. If the automobile sector gets impacted, job creation will be impacted in a country like India. Also, think about it that copper is also very, very vital for various of the government programs, for example, rural electrification. There also copper is required for reliable replacement of electric wires, which is being done by the distribution companies. There also copper is important. So once you have the deficiency of copper, in that particular case, we are looking at a larger loss in our economic growth. Now, here what I was trying to convey earlier. When it comes to the case of production, copper ores and unrefined copper, largely from Chile, Peru, Indonesia, Zambia, that is the region of the Katanga Plateau in Africa, right? So, from all these areas, look at where the copper is going for refining and processing. For processing, 56% and more of it is going into China, right? Because it has built up the capacity. It used to come to India as well, but then, ever since the closing up of the Sterlite plant in Tamil Nadu due to environmental concerns, now India's smelting capacity has reduced furthermore. Then, after that, even for refining, after that, it is from China. Look at it that China refines also. All the other countries, they send it to various places for refining after processing, but China ensures refining as well. So, refined copper for industrial use is majorly utilized again by the Chinese. Now, if you take a look at the copper production in India, the copper regions in India, most of the copper regions are to be found in Rajasthan. K3 copper deposit is a particular one which is famous. Then you have the Betul, some areas in Singhbhum, then some areas in the region of Malanchkar. So in Bilaspur Katni region, so these are the areas where you have some of the big copper mines. But in India, there is a scarcity in terms of copper production and the refined copper which is available to us. So what are the issues? Supply chain. We don't have enough raw materials. And also, that is why India is rushing to have deals with countries like Chile, with Peru, with African nations, so that we can secure for ourselves a fixed source of copper supply. Now, countries like China have done this almost 20 years ago. So that is why they are already in a very good space. Environmental degradation is also an issue. Now, the copper mining, refining, now this is something which pollutes the environment quite substantially. So that is why in India it has not been picked up as an industry. For example, that was the reason behind the closing and the shutdown of the major copper refining industry in Tamil Nadu. High energy consumption in the processing and refining process, you require a fixed, assured, high amount of energy at an affordable rate. Now, if as a country you are not able to provide that, processing infrastructure has not developed. Dependence on imports is very high. Technological issues they prevail. We don't have that technological prowess also. And many of the exporting countries they frequently face political instability. As a consequence, India also has not been able to fix the import lines there. So these are the issues which India and Indian copper industry is facing in general. So, as a consequence of that, you will find that in our country, we are now completely import dependent, and that is where China has gained an upper hand, and even countries otherwise they have a better supply chain than us. So, what is required to be done? Greater exploration. Where do you find copper rocks, copper ores? You generally find in the old cratonic structure. For example, you find it in Aravali Craton and the uh, Chota Nagpur Craton in India, some parts of Bastar Craton. So, in old igneous rock structures, that is where in the veins and lodes you find the presence of copper minerals. Those regions which have gone through multiple different phases of older igneous rocks going through multiple different phases of compression is where the copper concentrates are to be found in greater amount. So, greater extraction, setting up of more processing and refining facilities in our country so that we can process that. And this needs to be set up now so that the impact can be felt 10 years down the line. Okay. Now, then let us take a look at the question. What are transition minerals? Discuss the issues faced by the copper industry and highlight the issues faced by industry. Yeah. Now, this is a 15 marker question. The first part of the question that is, what are transition minerals? So, that is something that you can talk about. That will be your intro, right? Give the example lithium, cobalt, copper. They are your transition minerals. Issues faced by the copper industries across the world: surge in demand, limited processing and refining facilities, all the supply chain uh, bottleneck created by China, and limited suppliers. That are the issues. And then issues faced by India, we have discussed. Now, this question also provides you some scope to write about way forward, which you can summarize that going ahead into the future, India needs to secure reserves by entering into the trade agreements with the nations like Chile, Peru, DRC, and at the same time ensure enough exploration and smelting facilities are created within India in order to ensure a resilient supply. Okay, like that, you can talk about and write the answer. Do try to write the answers for this as well. Okay, now bridging the gulf. Now, this is a small editorial piece article. Now, this is about India must tread cautiously as it negotiates defense ties with the Gulf nations. Now, yesterday, you had a 2 hour visit by the UAE president and ruler of Abu Dhabi, that is Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, also referred to as MBZ. Now, MBZ's visit in India, now it was for a very short duration, but in that duration, it was first of all he was received very warmly by the prime minister, going to the older friendship that they have. Now, this uh, friendship that we have with UAE. Now, that has been a time tested friendship for India. It has got, UAE has got a large Indian diaspora as well as UAE now is one of the regions where the central portion of funding for various startups, financial hub, that is being established. So, for company to company ties also, Dubai is turning out to be the newer London of today's century and today's end. So, UAE holds a substantial amount of importance for us. And that is why the ties with UAE, they have always been given a kind of prime importance. Now, strengthening economic partnership. So, UAE is India's third largest trading partner, second largest export destination, seventh largest foreign investor. A lot of FDIs are routed through UAE. Now, the meeting that you had yesterday, now, as a consequence of that, some of the key outcomes commitment to double the bilateral trade, $200 billion, including fossil fuel as well, a $3 billion LNG deal, UAE investments in Gujarat as well. Now, the two countries had earlier concluded the bilateral trade agreement, the first bilateral trade agreement with any Gulf country. This was done in 2022. But what raised eyebrows was not because of the ambition to increase the trade to $200 billion or a $3 billion LNG deal. That did not raise eyebrows. Eyebrows were raised because of the strategic defense partnership, the negotiation of which has been happening in the backdrop. Now, there were murmurs yesterday as well that India has finalized a strategic defense partnership with UAE. Now, after that, Vikram Misri, our foreign secretary, issued a clarification that this is not like what you observe in Saudi Pakistan deal, where the boots on the ground will be in Saudi. No, not like that. So, this is a kind of a defense partnership that UAE is trying to weave with India in order to gain assurance in the region. We have discussed in the first article as well that West Asia and Middle East is at tenterhooks. All of them are left seeking out for their own betterment. Now, India has been a time tested friend of UAE. Now, this defense partnership, while it may not mean the foot on the ground, it simply talks about diversifying the options that UAE has. Because when we talk about the region of Middle East is a complicated area. Now, in the region of the Middle East and the entire region of the Gulf, you will observe that already you have what is being dubbed as the Islamic NATO by Saudi Arabia, then Pakistan with a defense deal, and then you also have Turkey. Now, you might have a question that why doesn't UAE simply join this alliance after all? After all, Pakistan is ready to deploy their army also, which India is not. So, the reason being that Saudi Arabia and UAE, they don't exactly look eye to eye. Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince and the person de facto in power in Saudi Arabia, and MBZ of UAE, they are at loggerheads. Now, think about it 10 years ago, or almost 9 years ago, when you basically had a kind of an alliance against the Houthis in Yemen, both the countries they came together. But over a period of time, owing to some of the actions by the West as well, and some of the insecurities created by the Israeli action in the region, both the countries have drifted apart. And both these countries, they don't look eye to eye. They look at each other as a kind of a competitor, as a kind of an enemy. That is why MBS, being a part of this alliance, automatically keeps UAE out of this order. And that is why UAE is seeking for another alliance. Now, while it can be beneficial for India to deepen the relationship in the Gulf nation, India has to be wary about walking a very tight rope that it should not anger countries on the side of Saudi Arabia. We have done that. Our diplomacy has been an expert in that for decades now. So that is where we should not be looked at or viewed at falling into a kind of a camp politics or group politics in the region of West Asia. So all the economic laurels and outcome, while they are a welcome gesture, but at the same time, we have to be vague. Because again, when it comes to Middle East, these two are important. Diaspora, remittances, and also the kind of energy security. And with UAE, now you have multiple corporate houses in India setting up their business destinations in Dubai. So that is why business relationship is also a rise. And we have partnered UAE with multiple other areas also. For example, Mangrove Alliance for Climate. Now there also India is a partner with a UAE-led initiative, right? So we have been partnering UAE. So we should value that relationship at the same time seek to deepen the relationship in the then the importance of Pax Silica for India. Now, as is the case with Mr. Trump, Donald Trump decided to declare an initiative that is Pax Silica. Now, what is the meaning of Pax Silica? Pax indicates a kind of peace gesture, right? And silica here indicates the kind of a rain or an era of semiconductors. So that is why peaceful utilization and the access to semiconductors. This is not the first time that the term Pax has been used. Mind you, Pax Britannica was the famous clarion call during the colonial period. Then you had the post Second World War world, and that was the era which was famously referred to as the Pax Americana, the dominance of America across the world for peaceful purposes. So, Pax Silica is something on the similar lines. Pax again indicates full peace, and silica here is for semiconductor. Now, why is it that US felt the need to basically form an alliance that is Pax Silica? The reason is simple. When it comes to semiconductors, now semiconductor manufacturing is something which is concentrated in China, right? Now, this is something where the world faced a first rude shock during the COVID pandemic. When the supply lines from China was cut off, it was observed that the supply lines across the world, they are disrupted. Automobile industry, electronic industry, everything suffered across the world because of China's issue. Then, last year, when Trump was throwing tariff tantrums across the world, that you get 40%, you get 50%, you get 20%, and you are lucky you get 19%. At that point of time, he dared this move against China as well. China immediately retaliated with a kind of a countermeasure and counter tariff almost on rare earth element, magnets, and even in is the semiconductor. So that is where, when it comes to the next generation of semiconductors, now these semiconductors, mind you, they are the key sources from which the world is run in a way. For example, from being in your laptop to the telephone screens that you are looking at right now, to the case of the mobile phones, the automobiles that you have, the space vehicles, the defense tech that you have, the rail line communication, everywhere semiconductors have an increased role. Now, if these semiconductors, they are basically in a way concentrated in one powerful hands, the world can be held at ransom. That is why the US has led an initiative to create a kind of an ecosystem where the countries can come together and they can collaborate on building the semiconductors for the future. Now, in this Pax Silica initiative, India was not invited. Obviously, Trump is not happy with India post Operation Sindoor, so that doesn't help. But India was not invited. So, first of all, what is Pax Silica? What are the members? So, on December 12th, US convened the inaugural Pax Silica summit, reduce coercive dependencies in critical technologies, secure global supply chains for semiconductors, AI, and critical minerals, build trusted digital and manufacturing infrastructure across the world. So, that is the basic purpose. Who are the signatories? Australia, Greece, Israel, Japan, Qatar, Korea, Singapore. UAE, and UK. Right now, Australia, because it is a leading lithium exporter. Israel in defense tech and AI, Israel is leading. Japan, semiconductor leadership in electronic industry. Qatar, why Qatar and UAE, by the way? They have money, and money buys you almost everything. So for any of the industry, you require investment. Where do you get the investment? From the West Asian nations. So Qatar and UAE, Republic of Korea for the memory chips, Singapore again has become what Dubai is trying to become, has been the region of transit for the businesses for almost a quarter of the century. So all the major businesses, critical businesses, they are routed through Singapore, and then UK because it is in US's own sphere. So these are your signatories. But you have non-signatory participants as well. Canada, European Union, Netherlands, OECD, and Taiwan. India is not a member. Now, when we talk about India, should India be a member here? Not being a part of Pax Silica, we can say Donald Trump is angry upon us, and that is why he has not made us a part of this grouping. That is a typical FOMO mentality, fear of missing out mentality. But the reality of the matter is also something which we should look into. Are we well developed when it comes to semiconductor industry? The answer is no. Do we have anything substantial to offer in the global growth of semiconductor industry? The answer is yes. So presently, do we have the technical capacity? The answer is no. But majority of the semiconductors which are in use across the globe, you will have some or the other designers in India, software sector in India who are doing that. So we do have the software capability. Now that is something which is vitally important. Then other than that, we also have the presence of skilled manpower, skilled manpower, right? The trained professionals, the engineers, the technocrats that we have in our country, that will go a long way. Then we have larger market where all the AI models, now you put India out of the AI model market, the AI models won't have that good a training or that great a sample size. Right. So in India, all the other criterias are fulfilled, but the problem is that we have not done anything substantial till. Potential is there. So, what should India learn out of this? Rather than basically pleading its way through to be a part of Pax Silica, India should develop what India is doing. Multiple semiconductor startups are coming up. So we should focus on that. The government incentives which are being provided, that should be increased and furthermore focused. And as a consequence, it takes some time. It is not something which can be done overnight, but you are doing it for the long run for the next 50, 60 years. So 10 to 12 years will be required for us to gain that kind of expertise. This is where industry should partner more with the academia, with the institutions like the IITs, the IISC, in order to develop newer methodologies of and newer material for semiconductor manufacturing. We have to develop our own capacity and we have to earn our rights and our place at global high. Okay. Now, then some of the articles relevant for your prelims. Why only female Darwin's bark spiders weave the toughest web? So basically, Darwin's bark spider, particularly the female, now they are known for weaving some of the strongest orb webs. What are there? What is an orb web? This is the orb web, right? A typical spider web. Now, this species of spider, is endemic to Madagascar, found over small rivulets, streams, etc. And they weave very large nets over these rivulets. So overall, you will find that they anchor their webs over water. So the web is hanging above water, as you can see in the image, so that any insect, any kind of smaller species which goes into the water, they can be trapped here. And this is so strong. The tensile strength is higher than that of steel. and even any kind of human based Kevlar that can be manufactured, the tensile strength of this web is much stronger than that. So they create the largest or webs stretching almost 82 feet across the rivers. So where are they endemic to? Madagascar. And what is their IUCN status? IUCN status is endangered. Okay. Now, here, this is an image which has been used in the science section of the newspaper to indicate peatlands. So, very briefly, what are peatlands? So, peatlands are your marshy ecosystem where it is waterlogged, where the water logging basically cuts off the supply of oxygen. So, the vegetation which is submerged, that cannot be decomposed completely. It is decomposed very partially, right? So, as a consequence, it is a storehouse of carbon because the decomposition has not happened. So, here the production of organic matter exceeds its decomposition, and there is a net accumulation of peat as a result of that. They occur in every climatic zone and every continent. Total area globally is 4 million square kilometer, almost 3%. Where across the world you will find them? You'll find them in large proportion, particularly in the boreal region, the higher latitudes. Russia, Canada, for example, even when you consider Brazil, Democratic Republic of Congo, in these regions, some parts of UK as well, large amount of peatlands will be found. Now, it is a climate tipping point. We have discussed that in the Conquer Prelims for Environment, that it is a climate tipping point, that once due to global warming, the water in the peatland evaporates. As a consequence, all the stored carbon also will evaporate. That will lead to further increase of global. Now, in December, core sectors grew at a 4-month high. Now, what are the core sectors of our economy? Now, these are 8 different sectors of the economy, which constitutes almost 40% of our index of industrial production. So, they are a vital parameter in terms of indicating that what are the what is the prospect of economic growth. So, here, when you talk about coal, crude oil, natural gas, refinery products, fertilizers, steel, cement, and electricity. These are the core sectors which are important for Indian economy. Now, overall, the core sectors have grown. So here, electricity and coal, along with the other sectors, have indicated. Steel sector has also indicated an increase. Now, this was asked in UPSC prelims earlier as well. Okay, that which are the core sectors. I've completed UCAN January to December. It The Conquer prelims will be a kind of a revision for you, okay, with the updated format. So take a look into that. Now, Trump slams UK's move to hand over Chagos Islands. Now, Chagos Islands, their location is important for you. Where are Chagos Islands situated? What Trump has said is something, again, not very important. So here, when we talk about Chagos Islands, so overall, this is where you have Mauritius, right? Part of the entire Mascarene Island group. And here you will find the Chagos Archipelago. Okay. So Chagos Archipelago was under the UK administration but claimed by Mauritius as per the ruling of International Court of Justice and the UN resolutions of UN clause as well. So if you take a look at the Chagos Archipelago, you'll find this is the point of contention. That is Diego Garcia. Diego Garcia is where you have the largest military base of UK and US in the region of Indian Ocean. Many of the strategic assets are deployed in the region of Diego Garcia. So that is in the southern part of the Chagos archipelago. What kind of question can be asked in the prelims? A simple question can be asked that Three Brother Islands, Danger Islands, Egmont Islands, and Diego Garcia are a part of which island group or archipelago, right? So that kind of identification based question can be asked. And this is something which lies where? In the southern hemisphere. Diego Garcia, 7 degree south. Okay. So that brings us to the end of the discussion for the day. I hope that you would have enriched some amount of content which has been discussed. Now, if you have liked the session, put that in the comment section. And please don't forget to click on the like, share, and the subscribe button. We meet again tomorrow. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you.